Tonight we dive into a rather unusual battle, one you probably didn't even know existed. Picture yourself standing in a cavernous Victorian reading room, lit by flickering gaslight, surrounded by rows of somber, fusty tomes stacked high like silent sentries. The air is heavy with the scent of leather bindings, pipe smoke, and something else, dust. And not the gentle household variety. This dust has history, personality, and possibly a vendetta. You're about to witness how an entire profession, austere, bow-tied librarians with monocles and strong tea habits, once went to war against dust, wielding a most unexpected weapon, very tiny electric fans. But don't be fooled by the whimsy. This was real. There were debates, pamphlets, prototype disasters, and the occasional scandal involving improper airflow. You probably won't survive this without sneezing at least once. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're watching from. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up the stone steps of the Colchester Public Library. The year is 1854, and you are not ready. You're underpaid, overdressed in wool, and absolutely done with the sneezing. You haven't even opened the main reading room yet, and already your nostrils are tingling with the prelude of a most disrespectful sneeze. This, you think, will be the third sneeze before breakfast. But you keep walking. The floors creak with the same complaint they issue every morning. The library has survived decades of candle smoke, soot from coal fires, industrial fogs, and the occasional leaky roof. And it wears every stain like a badge. There's no central heating, no vacuum, and only a damp rag to wipe down the circulation desk. Somewhere above you, the upper balcony shivers with a sudden draft. Or maybe that's just the ghost of overdue books. You reach the main room and unlock the tall doors with a ceremonial clunk. As they swing open, a golden beam of light pierces the windows and immediately illuminates the enemy. Dust. It dances in the morning sun, taunting you. Specks swirl like lazy gnats, drifting slowly between shelves, settling on ledges, nestling inside book covers, and gathering in sinister piles beneath chairs. It's everywhere. And you know that by noon, you'll be rubbing your eyes, red and watery, while scrawling Quarto, Volume 3, Faded Spine on yet another repair docket. You hate dust. Every librarian does. And this morning, as you sneeze with undignified violence into your cravat, something inside you snaps. You don't know it yet, but this is the sneeze that sparks it all. You're not alone in your despair. All across Britain, librarians are sneezing themselves into action. It's the golden age of classification systems and strict reading room etiquette, but no one can figure out how to stop the daily downpour of historical particulates. So far, efforts have included oiling the floors, wetting the drapes, and hiring a particularly grumpy boy named Edwin to sweep things half-heartedly while muttering about Dickens. None of it works. Historians still argue whether it was the sneezing or the rise of germ theory that really kicked off the dust war. Some suggest that the arrival of Louis Pasteur's early papers on microorganisms seeded a panic. If germs were real, what better place for them to live than inside dusty, unventilated books read by coughing strangers? Others point to a certain Lady Barrington who, after borrowing a copy of Wuthering Heights, claimed to have developed a nervous rash and 3 weeks of dreams involving dampness and regret. True or not, the anecdote made it into the Illustrated Library Review and set off a flurry of letters. The tone of most, something must be done. Enter the Royal Society for Sanitary Reform, a delightfully severe-sounding organization that liked to inspect public institutions and suggest unrequested changes. They published a small report in 1855 entitled On the Vicious Accumulation of Dust in Public Libraries, which read more like a Gothic horror novel than a hygiene guide. One sentence claimed, "Dust in excessive quantities may incubate miasmas and cause moral weakness." You wonder what moral weakness smells like. Possibly like feet. The report made waves, and soon librarians began forming local dust committees. You attend your first one wearing a hat too small and a scowl too large. The chairman, a gaunt man with a voice like parchment, gives a rousing speech on the danger of neglecting the spines of folios. Someone suggests wiping books with vinegar-soaked cheesecloths. Someone else proposes relocating all non-fiction volumes underground. You begin sketching what a library would look like if every book was suspended from the ceiling, safe from floor dust. None of it is realistic. But all of it is sincere. By the end of the meeting, you feel the first flicker of hope. Not because anyone has a solution, but because, for once, someone else sneezed before you did. In the months that follow, you start to notice changes. Shelves are dusted more regularly. Patrons are asked to handle books with gloves. The cleaning budget triples. You get a new broom made of something called antistatic horsehair. It smells suspiciously like regular horse. There are even whisperings of a man in Liverpool, a former watchmaker, who is developing a device that moves air deliberately. You scoff at the idea. How can moving air solve a dust problem? Air is the problem. But something about the phrase sticks with you. Moves air deliberately. You tuck it away in the same mental drawer where you keep your best sarcastic remarks, unused tickets to a lecture on Chaucer, and a growing suspicion that the janitor is secretly borrowing the forbidden texts. As winter sets in and the library's coal stoves start up, the dust gets worse. It comes down in soft grey waves, coating everything in a light fuzz. You begin to fantasize about windows that open, chimneys that suck, and rooms with floors that clean themselves. One night, while reorganizing the travel section, you sneeze so hard that sketches of the Ottoman Empire falls on your foot. That's when you decide, the war is on. You're kneeling by the bottom shelf of the theology section when it finally hits you, books are absolutely filthy creatures. Not in the way a Victorian moralist might accuse a French novel of being, but literally, alarmingly, biologically filthy. The kind of filthy that squats in neglected corners and reproduces with a sort of dusty malevolence. You brush your hand across the spine of an old concordance and come away with a smear that looks suspiciously like powdered chimney. Later, you time it. 3 seconds of inactivity, and the dust begins to resettle. It's like watching sediment in a swamp, except the swamp is your library, and the sediment is composed of skin flakes, soot, pollen, and regrets. You wipe your hand on your apron and look around, finally seeing it for what it is, a slow invasion. A grey bloom creeping across knowledge itself. You remember a line from one of your favorite naturalists, "Dust is the graveyard of matter." And you start to wonder what's buried in yours. Across Britain, similar discoveries are being made, though not always with your poetic flair. In Oxford, a frantic assistant finds a desiccated mouse skeleton inside a German-English dictionary. In Newcastle, someone opens a history of the Roman Empire to discover it's now home to a thriving silverfish colony. There's a rumor that a librarian in Brighton had to fumigate an entire room after finding mold spores thick enough to write your name in. Historians still argue whether that librarian existed or if he was a cautionary tale cooked up by the hygiene lobby. But the story gets retold enough that his legend sticks, the man who nearly drowned in his own archives. What makes it worse is that most of these books came from private collections. Aristocrats and scholars who smoked cigars over open pages, or used religious texts as doorstops, or left valuable manuscripts in attics alongside generations of moths. These weren't just books, they were survivors of battles no one ever fought. And you, lucky you, have inherited them. As a result, your cleaning routine becomes more detailed than your cataloging system. You start each day with a dry brush sweep, then a linen cloth buff, followed by an inspection using a small hand mirror for spotting high-shelf filth. You make a log: Monday, poetry alcove, medium dust. Tuesday, periodicals, faint mildew odor. You consider naming the more persistent dust colonies. Maybe the patch behind the maps cabinet is the United Smuts of Britannica. You start noticing patterns. Dust loves the south wall in the afternoon, likely due to the sunlight drawing in particles. The Greek philosophy section is particularly grimy, possibly because no one ever reads it and the books haven't been opened since 1847. But the romance novels? Oddly pristine. Perhaps smitten fingers naturally clean. One Thursday afternoon, after chasing a tiny puffball across 3 sections, you collapse into a chair and stare at the ceiling. You realize something that seems both profound and stupid. Books don't just collect dust, they create it. Every time a page turns, tiny fragments flake off. Leather bindings shed. Paper decays. Glue turns to powder. Your precious catalogue is a factory of microscopic mess. The notion catches on. A pamphlet circulates in Edinburgh called Decay and the Printed Word. The author, an anonymous concerned reader, writes that every library is a slow explosion of paper turning to dust. It reads like something out of Poe. You secretly admire the flair. Public awareness rises. By 1858, several newspapers are publishing editorials on the need for cleaner books for a cleaner Britain. One article in the Times likens public libraries to coal mines of knowledge, rich, deep, and perilous to breathe in. Back in your reading room, the conversation begins to shift. Dust is no longer just a nuisance, it's a symbol of decay, of disorder, of what happens when civilization is allowed to go unpolished. You hear a patron mutter, "Imagine what the French think of our book hygiene," and you know something has changed. National pride is involved now. No one wants to be outdusted by Paris. Quirky local solutions begin to emerge. In Bath, one library installs velvet curtains over each shelf. In York, an enthusiastic headmaster invents a shoulder-mounted feather duster harness, sort of like a bookish exoskeleton. You hear of a woman in Manchester who claims beeswax polish can repel not only dust but illiteracy. She may have misunderstood the assignment. You try a few things yourself. Cotton wraps for rare books. Air-shaking sessions where you and the cleaner flap old newspapers to stir the dust up, then try to chase it out an open window. You even try a makeshift dust moat, a damp cloth laid around high-risk shelving like a trap. It doesn't work, but you enjoy imagining tiny particles getting stuck like guilty trespassers. And still, the dust comes. Always more. Always back. You begin to have dreams, elaborate, hazy dreams where you wander an infinite library, each book so coated in soot that you can't read a single title. You wake with a sneeze. Sometimes two. There's also the matter of health. Increasingly, colleagues complain of chronic respiratory issues. The term library lung is floated at a London conference. A doctor named Whitlock presents a paper linking prolonged exposure to paper rot and particulate matter with coughing, sinus irritation, and possibly low mood and indecisiveness. Librarians everywhere nod slowly, indecisively. The correlation is too consistent to ignore. You begin noticing more patrons using handkerchiefs, and one elderly gentleman comes in wearing what looks suspiciously like a plague mask. He says it's for the spores. You decide not to ask follow-up questions. By the end of the decade, the word bibliodust becomes popular slang among library workers. A secretive little society begins forming, jokingly called the Dustbusters, though they prefer custodians of purity. They write letters, swap tips, and hold monthly competitions for cleanest reading room. You enter once and lose to a woman who used boiled milk to clean shelves. You remain suspicious. The movement is gaining traction, but no one yet has a grand solution. Brushes help. Cloths assist. But they're reactive, not preventative. You dream of something different. A way to stop the dust from landing in the first place. Something invisible, constant, vigilant. You want the air to fight back. You don't know it yet, but the fan is coming. Not just any fan, a tiny, buzzing miracle that will stir the air and disrupt the dust's lazy ballet. The Victorian war on grime is about to get mechanical. And you, whether you like it or not, are about to become one of its first commanders. You're elbow deep in the geography section, brushing off a copy of the physical atlas with a horsehair brush you've named Florence, when the door creaks open and in walks Reverend Josiah Whitcomb, wearing the self-important expression of someone about to suggest something impractical. You brace yourself. My good fellow, he begins, already fishing a folded pamphlet from his coat pocket. Have you heard the latest from the Public Morality and Hygiene League? You hadn't. But you will. What he hands you is titled The Moral Consequences of Filthy Books. It includes hand-drawn illustrations of dust mites in suits of armor, truly, and a diagram suggesting that dirty books lead directly to moral corruption, possibly socialism, and definitely headaches. You try not to laugh. Or sneeze. Across Britain, a new wave of reformers is arriving, not just to save the souls of the working class, but to sanitize their shelves. These crusaders are a strange breed, part health nut, part busybody, and fully obsessed with cleanliness as a path to virtue. They see libraries not as temples of thought, but as moral battlegrounds. Books must be protected from sin and soot in equal measure. You find yourself caught in the middle. On the one hand, you do appreciate the new supply of clean cloths and lemon oil. On the other, there's something deeply unnerving about being told that novels with dust jackets are seductive in the wrong ways. Historians still argue whether this book hygiene movement was genuinely about health, or just another excuse for the upper classes to lecture everyone else about their filth. Probably both. The Victorians, after all, had a knack for turning bodily functions into social crises. Dust. Clearly a sign of declining morals and poor breeding. Suddenly, the library becomes a performance space. There are new signs. Wipe hands before handling. Sneezing in silence, please. You start catching patrons eyeing each other suspiciously. Who brought in the fluff from the window seat? Was it the man with the moustache and suspicious coat? Your daily rituals begin to feel more like priestly rites. You anoint the card catalogue with beeswax. You bless the encyclopedias with dry cloth and firm resolve. You ban food in the reading room with the kind of authority normally reserved for high judges or cranky vicars. And yet, no matter how fervent your cleansing, dust still wins. It creeps in through cracks, rides on the hems of skirts, trickles down from ancient beams. At night, you imagine it plotting, tiny, mustached particles forming committees and assigning scouts to the poetry aisle. One morning, you arrive early to find a pamphlet tucked anonymously under the returns box. It's handwritten and titled "The Air Itself is Guilty." Its author blames the very atmosphere for your troubles. Dust, it reads, is but the breath of decayed time, and to cleanse it, we must disturb the air, not just the surface. You smirk, mostly because it's the first time someone else has said what you've been thinking all along. Around this time, a new figure emerges, Miss Clorinda Peel, a chemist turned hygienist with a shocking amount of energy and an unshakable belief in vinegar. She visits your library in a starched dress and immediately takes a dislike to the stack room, declaring it spiritually moldy. She brings with her something new, swabbing. Using treated gauze on sticks, she takes dust samples from different surfaces and stores them in labeled jars. Proof, she declares, that this building is fermenting. She recommends lavender water, ventilation, and possibly small prayer circles for the particularly dusty corners. Her ideas are odd, but her timing is impeccable. Public health officials begin taking libraries seriously. After years of treating them as dusty afterthoughts, now they're being inspected, measured, charted. Your library receives a 32 on the Cleanliness Index, better than the Manchester Mechanics Institute but worse than the Ladies' Lending Library of Bath, who, to be fair, use lace doilies on every shelf. You're not quite sure how you feel. On one hand, you're thrilled. You've always known the air was part of the problem. On the other, the pressure is mounting. There are expectations now. Dust isn't just dirt, it's failure. That's when the debates begin. Letters to the editor appear in your local newspaper. Some call for regular book baths. You shudder at the thought. Others suggest the burning of especially grimy tomes. One recommends placing eucalyptus leaves between every few pages to soothe the lungs and the Lord. You suspect that one was Miss Peel. You, naturally, start experimenting. You hang strips of muslin from the ceiling like ghostly curtains. You try feathering pages with handmade fans. You even convince the mayor to fund a circulation hour, during which all doors and windows are flung open, and patrons are encouraged to wave books around for the greater good. It's absolute chaos. Pages flutter, someone's bonnet flies out the window, and a child is nearly concussed by a flying edition of Robinson Crusoe. But you log fewer sneezes that day than any this month. It feels like victory. Still, not everyone is on board. A growing number of patrons complain that your tactics are disruptive to serious study. One man writes to complain that the rustling of cloth and the scent of turpentine are not conducive to enlightenment. He signs his letter with only 2 initials, which you assume stands for very boring. But you can't stop. Not now. You join a newly formed group, the London Association for the Purification of Printed Materials. You receive a monthly bulletin called The Gentle Wipe. It features articles like damp cloths, friend or fungus, and toward a breezier future. You start attending their meetings, where conversations bounce between esoteric and absurd. One speaker argues that dust contains historical memory and should be preserved. Another claims it causes infertility in pigeons. You mostly just enjoy the tea. One evening, during a particularly tedious debate on whether tanned leather bindings attract more dust than red cloth covers, someone mutters, "We need something to move the air." Heads turn. You freeze. The phrase echoes something you read months ago, moves air deliberately. Suddenly, you wonder what if you could control the air. Not just open a window and hope, but actually direct it. That night, you begin sketching again. Fans. Tiny ones. Gentle, constant. Something that stirs the air just enough to keep the dust floating, never settling, until you can escort it right out the door. It sounds ridiculous. Futuristic. Borderline magical. But then again, so did book hygiene, not long ago. You're hunched over your writing desk, candle flickering beside an open sketchpad, when you finally commit to the idea, tiny fans. Not the kind that rustle skirts or knock over inkwells, no, these would hum softly in corners, perched on shelves like mechanical owls, stirring the air just enough to keep dust suspended, just long enough for it to drift harmlessly away. You begin with rough diagrams. Brass casing, rotating blades, a slender crank arm or pulley system powered by foot treadles or, ideally, clockwork. You're no engineer, but you're a librarian with a vendetta. You've spent years fighting dust with brushes and cloths and stern glares. It's time to go airborne. You name the design the Air Shepherd. The first one you build is a disaster. The blades are too wide, and the motor, borrowed from a broken music box, has an unfortunate tendency to screech like a strangled cricket. It whirs into life, spins violently for 3 seconds, and then launches itself off the shelf and crashes into the wall with a thunk that disturbs every volume of natural history on the south side. You try again. The second prototype uses a hand-cranked mechanism, disguised inside a copy of Ivanhoe. It's charming but impractical. No one wants to crank a fan every 10 minutes while reading about chivalry. You contemplate recruiting school children to crank them on rotation, but the logistics, and likely complaints, make your head ache. So you turn to someone smarter, Miss Peel. Clorinda Peel arrives with a carpet bag full of wires, vinegar tinctures, and righteous enthusiasm. She eyes your sketch with the narrowed scrutiny of a chemist trying to find arsenic in jam. Then, to your relief, she smiles. Clockwork, she declares. Miniature windmill gears. I know a man in Kent. You've never been so thrilled to hear the word Kent. Within a month, the two of you are collaborating in the backroom between returns and reference. By day, you're shelving books and explaining the Dewey Decimal System to confused factory workers. By night, you're soldering metal and lubricating gear teeth with a mixture of lard and paraffin. Your third prototype works. It's about the size of a grapefruit, shaped like a tulip bulb, and rests atop a discrete brass stem. When wound, it spins quietly for 45 minutes, creating a light, constant breeze. You test it by placing it in the dusty alcove behind the cartography cabinet. The next morning, the usual fine layer of fluff is gone. You gasp so loudly a patron drops their copy of Pilgrim's Progress. You and Miss Peel begin deploying them quietly, one at a time. You call them whisperers to keep things less technical and more romantic. The fans are disguised as decorative items, some inside hollowed-out books, others perched inside porcelain vases with slotted lids. They don't just work, they're elegant. The idea spreads, first among your peers. Fellow librarians write to you, how did you get the reading desk to stop attracting fluff? And you reply with polite little diagrams. Eventually, someone dubs the devices Peel fans, and Clorinda beams for a full week. Still, not everyone is charmed. A few traditionalists call it unnatural. Dust is part of the book's journey, insists a crusty old scholar who smells like tweed and mothballs. Another complains that the breeze tickles his ear hair. There's also the question of whether fans harm the essence of the space. A clergyman from Exeter writes that artificial air may carry unwholesome spirits through the stacks. Miss Peel reads it aloud during tea and chokes on a biscuit. Historians still argue whether your fans marked the start of true mechanized preservation or were merely a blip in the timeline of book care. What's certain is this: they became a phenomenon. Small libraries in Liverpool, Glasgow, and even sleepy rural Norfolk begin installing them. There's something satisfying in watching the breeze dance along the tops of the shelves. Patrons no longer sneeze with the regularity of church bells. One even calls the air exhilarating, though that might have just been the strong tea. Encouraged, you begin refining the designs. You test different blade lengths, casing materials, and placements. Miss Peel conducts experiments to see if lavender oil added to the motor lubricant discourages mites. It doesn't, but the room smells amazing. Eventually, the London Illustrated News runs a short feature, Tiny Fans, Mighty Purpose, How Librarians Are Defeating Dust. You clip it, frame it, and hang it above your desk. In the photo, you're shown adjusting one of your whisperers while Miss Peel leans in, mid-explanation. The caption misidentifies you as Mr. Feel. You let it slide. The press attention draws curiosity, and not all of it scholarly. An industrialist named Thaddeus Larchmont visits unannounced. He's large, loud, and wears a waistcoat embroidered with the skyline of Leeds. He offers to mass-produce the fans, with a few changes for marketability. You ask what kind of changes. He replies, make 'em spin faster and louder, people like noise, shows power. You politely decline. Quiet, after all, is your entire brand. But still, the idea is out there now. You've planted a seed. Soon, a company in Birmingham releases a rival model, the Library Breeze Companion, powered by a wall crank and advertised with the unsettling slogan "Push back the fill." It's heavy, awkward, and so loud that one user reports it frightened my cat into the fireplace. Despite the competition, your version holds steady. The handmade fans, delicate and nearly silent, become a quiet revolution. Some call it the gentle drift movement. You prefer to think of it as librarian vengeance served with a draft. And best of all, the dust retreats. Shelf by shelf. Aisle by aisle. You notice it in the quiet. In the way patrons lean in more confidently. In the way books feel crisp instead of coated. One elderly visitor clasps your hand and says, "I haven't breathed this easy indoors since the Queen's Jubilee." You don't cry, but you definitely blink a lot. Word spreads beyond libraries. A museum in Brighton requests a demonstration. An archive in Dublin writes to ask if fans might help preserve parchment scrolls. Even the British Museum, usually slow to catch on unless mummies are involved, sends a formal inquiry. You're flattered, exhausted, and secretly a little smug. You and Miss Peel toast the moment with tea and almond biscuits. She makes a joke about fanning the flames of knowledge, and you pretend not to like it. And yet, even as your whisperers hum softly in the corners of half a dozen institutions, you can feel the dust waiting, pausing, adapting. Because the war isn't over. There are still blind spots. There are still places the fans can't reach. And now there's something new whispering through the library grapevine: airborne mold, microscopic spores, invisible threats even gentler than dust. You stare at your diagrams. You pour another cup of tea. You wonder what comes next. But for now, the air moves. And for once, the dust does not. You're standing in the west wing of the library, adjusting a slightly askew whisperer fan perched inside a hollowed-out globe when you hear the unmistakable sound of someone huffing 3 short, indignant puffs. You don't have to turn around to know who it is. Mrs. Penelope Habersham, chairwoman of the Ladies' Guild for Moral Reading, is back. And she's brought her magnifying glass. She doesn't trust the fans. "This is artificial," she mutters, sniffing the air as though your careful breeze might be laced with absinthe. Books should be read in natural stillness, the way the Lord intended. You consider asking whether the Lord also intended tuberculosis, but think better of it. Instead, you smile, point her toward the devotional reading alcove, and make a note in your logbook: 10:41 a.m. usual suspect. Strong scent of lilac and disdain. The fans have been running for months now, and the results are remarkable. Dust, once a permanent companion, is now occasional. The smell of mildew that once haunted the poetry section has diminished. The difference isn't just physical, it's atmospheric. People linger longer, and no one seems to need handkerchiefs quite as often. You're not imagining it either. A visiting physician confirms your hunch: better air circulation reduces stagnation and discourages microbial bloom, he says, squinting at your fan like it's just pitched him a business idea. He calls it a charming contraption. You beam like a proud parent. But there's a new problem brewing. A string of letters appears in the Daily Chronicle under the heading "The Quiet Uprising." They accuse libraries of turning into laboratories. Books are not specimens, one writer cries. They are companions, and companions need no cleansing. You've hit the great British tipping point: success and suspicion. Historians still argue whether this backlash was rooted in nostalgia, anti-intellectualism, or just good old-fashioned fear of progress. Likely a blend. Every change must offend someone. You just didn't expect the resistance to come from the crocheting crowd. The criticism grows louder when your library becomes the subject of a short documentary film, one of those early reel-and-click jobs shown before the main feature at cinemas. It's called A Breath of Clean Air: How Knowledge Stays Dust-Free. You appear for exactly 7 seconds, adjusting a whisperer near the history stacks. You look sleepy and noble, like a librarian knight in quiet armor. But the piece is controversial. Letters flood in. Supporters praise it as visionary. Detractors claim you're sterilizing imagination. One even asks if book fragrance is being erased entirely. That one comes with a small sachet of pressed lavender enclosed, labeled in case you've forgotten how stories should smell. You give it to Miss Peel. She frames it. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, there's another battle happening. The library board is arguing about costs. Whisperers don't fund themselves, and while you've managed to stretch your tiny budget with spit, string, and goodwill, the brass gears and clockwork components aren't cheap. Nor are the quiet apprentices Miss Peel has taken under her wing nimble-fingered teenagers who trade algebra for gear polishing on weekends. To complicate matters further, an enterprising gentleman from Edinburgh patents a new design, the literary cyclone. It's larger, powered by gas, and according to an early review, sufficiently strong to ruffle skirts and blow out candles. You shudder. You're called to a board meeting to explain why your ornamental air toys are worth preserving. You prepare a demonstration. You bring charts. Miss Peel brings an unholy amount of tea biscuits. During your presentation, you ask the members to close their eyes and listen. The room is silent except for the low, rhythmic hum of 3 whisperers stationed at opposite corners. Then you open a jar of dust, gathered from the unused cellar, enough to induce sneezing at 10 paces. Except no one sneezes. The dust dances in the air, caught in gentle spirals and slowly nudged away, not one mote landing on the open books below. One board member claps. Another asks if they can purchase one for their study. The motion to continue funding passes unanimously. You and Miss Peel celebrate with orange marmalade and the good tea. Not the rationed kind, the real leaves. You allow yourselves one short jig in the staff hallway, careful not to dislodge a single pamphlet. Of course, victory always invites escalation. You begin experimenting with timing mechanisms. Some whisperers now run on timers, slowly winding down after an hour, then resuming with a soft click. Others include a scent chamber, a whiff of lemon, bergamot, even rosemary, though you scrap that one after a patron insists the philosophy section now smells hauntingly of roast lamb. You collaborate with other libraries, sending out kits and guides. A correspondence circle forms, where librarians swap improvements, gossip, and the occasional dried flower. Someone in York writes of hiding fans in carved lion heads. A woman in Bristol says she's training a cat to nap on a lever that powers her reading room model. You aren't sure if she's joking. And yet, with each passing week, the larger world catches up. A piece in Scientific Weekly describes your devices as a breakthrough in low-grade environmental management. A chemist in Manchester uses your design as inspiration for an airborne spore counter. A poet in Wales writes a piece titled Ode to a Gentle Gust, which is surprisingly beautiful. Even the postal service gets involved. One clerk writes that his sorting station has improved dramatically since placing a modified whisperer near the mail sacks. I no longer wheeze, he says, except when Miss Butterfield walks past. And then the university calls. They want a lecture. You freeze mid-scone. The invitation comes from none other than the Royal Society's lesser-known but still respectable division of practical atmospherics. They want you to speak on applied air motion in microarchival environments. You have no idea what that means, but you're flattered anyway. Miss Peel insists you go. They need to see the face behind the breeze, she says. Besides, I'll keep the whisperers running while you're gone. If I must, I'll bribe the apprentices with lemon drops. The journey to London is surreal. You bring diagrams, a sample whisperer, and exactly one set of pressed clothes. Your presentation goes better than expected. A few people nap, but politely. At the end, a professor of kinetic energy shakes your hand and says, "Marvelous. Simply marvelous." It's like a clock fell in love with a feather duster. You return to the library a bit stunned. Nothing has collapsed. The whisperers hum on. The books rest easy. You start to wonder, have you actually changed something? Just a bit. One afternoon, as you dust the children's corner, now practically fluff-free, you find a crayon drawing. A fan with a smiley face. The caption reads, "Thank you, Spinny Thing." You pin it above your desk. No matter what anyone says, you know now, you're not just fighting dust. You're shaping air. You're rearranging the pamphlet stand, one of those rotating towers filled with outdated tourist guides and stern notices about overdue books, when the door opens and the smell of snow blows in. A man steps inside, wrapped in a coat so thick it looks like he's hiding an entire tea service underneath. He's got cheeks like beetroot and eyebrows that have collected actual frost. You look up, expecting a question about the timetable or maybe where to find back issues of the Illustrated London News. Instead, he asks, "Are you the one with the fans?" You blink. "Yes," you say cautiously. "Though only the small kind." He introduces himself as Professor Emery Reed, a student of decay, which is either poetic or deeply unsettling. You offer him a chair and tea, and within minutes he's sketching out something on a napkin that looks suspiciously like a murder map, except the locations are labeled humidity pockets and fungal bloom epicenters. Reed's specialty is organic decomposition, what happens to paper, parchment, and leather bindings when humidity gets ideas above its station. "Dust is the first warning," he says, "but moisture is the traitor at the gates." You stare at your whisperers humming innocently in the corners. They've been marvelous at keeping the air moving, but could they do more? Historians still argue whether the Victorian period truly grasped the dangers of indoor microclimates, or simply stumbled through them with dashing ignorance and good tailoring. But Reed is clearly from the former school, the one that believes in precise conditions, aggressive preventative measures, and color-coded moisture charts. Together, you begin testing. You install little glass humidity gauges between the shelves. Miss Peel calls them air thermometers for the nervous. Reed introduces you to silica packets, the same sort used in the preservation of mummies. You tuck them discreetly behind encyclopedias and wait. Then comes the mold. Not a dramatic infestation, just a few sly patches of fuzz appearing in the library's basement collection. Old shipping logs, sea journals, and bound issues of Punch that haven't seen daylight since the Crimean War. At first you think it's dust. Then you notice the scent earthy, sour, almost smug. Reed is delighted. You are not. The next few weeks become a blur of inspections, dehumidifiers, clunky and terrifying, and whisperers modified to circulate air through cloth filters soaked in vinegar and rosemary extract. You build a prototype dubbed the Mold Whisperer. It's slightly larger, with an extra loop in the motor to strengthen airflow. It's also louder. Not enough to disturb reading, but just enough that Mrs. Habersham insists it's humming scripture backwards. You consider naming it after her, just for fun. Reed proposes adding charcoal panels to the whisperers, something to absorb ambient moisture and perhaps odors. Miss Peel is skeptical. "You'll have people smelling like fireplaces," she mutters. But the results are promising. Fewer spores, drier air, and oddly, fewer insects. You begin mapping the entire library into zones, where the air lingers, where it flows, where it stagnates. Reed draws diagrams resembling wind maps from naval logs. You install wind ribbons, dyed bits of silk that flutter faintly to help visualize airflow. They become something of a novelty. Patrons ask for the ribbon room. And then the university sends a delegation. 3 professors, one with a monocle, arrive under the pretense of scholarly interest but clearly hoping to steal your secrets. You give them a tour, proud but cautious, and when they begin noting things too quickly, Miss Peel casually drops a heavy dictionary. The monocle clatters to the floor. It's not sabotage. It's narrative tension. Still, your fame is growing. A French conservator writes to you from Paris. She's been battling mold in a Napoleonic archive and wants to try the Peel system. You send instructions. Weeks later, she writes back, "The musty smell is gone. My assistant no longer complains about le sneeze. Merci infiniment." A schoolteacher in Kent reports that her students concentrate better when whisperers are placed in the corners of the classroom. A bookseller in Cornwall swears her sales increased after clearing out mildew and adding a breeze. And just when you think things are under control, the wasps arrive. It begins innocently, a buzzing sound near the natural science shelves. You find one, then 2, then a cluster hovering near the ducts where whisperer air is funneled through a venting system. It turns out your fans have created the perfect warm microclimate for overwintering insects. Reed thinks it's hilarious. Miss Peel threatens to build a flamethrower. You go with mesh screens and peppermint oil. Still, the incident leads to an important discovery. Air movement, even gentle, changes everything. Temperature zones shift. Dust patterns mutate. Spores give way to insects, and insects lure predators. You're not just battling dust now. You're managing an entire ecosystem. One morning, you find a spider's web strung across a whisperer grill like bunting. It's beautiful. Delicate. You don't remove it. Later, a child points and whispers, "The fan has a pet." You smile. Reed proposes publishing your findings, an atmospheric approach to print preservation. You agree, but with conditions. No credit theft. No renaming the fans Reed regulators. He agrees, albeit with visible reluctance. Historians will later study the resulting article as one of the earliest recognitions that libraries are not static vaults but living, breathing spaces. Your quiet war on dust has evolved into something richer, stranger, and more vital. And people notice. One visitor leaves a note in the suggestion box, "Your library is the only place in town where I can breathe." Another signs the guest book, "Felt like a meadow, but with books." You begin taking quiet pride in the environment itself, not just the content on the shelves, but the air between them. The hush. The way light falls through a dustless window. The scent of paper untangled from mildew and mothballs. At night, when the building is still, you walk the aisles and listen. The whisperers hum. The silk ribbons stir. Somewhere, faintly, a clock ticks. And for once, you feel the space is, well, maybe not perfect, but whole. You're in the attic again, where the heat collects like a secret and every creak sounds like a ghost trying to mind its own business. The floorboards groan beneath you, but you're used to that now. What you're not used to is the sudden silence. No hum, no breeze, no soft, steady whir of your loyal whisperer number 7. It sits there, lifeless, a faint wisp of dust gathering along the edge of its fan blade, as if it's mocking you. You kneel to inspect it, heart sinking. The brass housing feels warm. Too warm. The gearworks are jammed with a mixture of soot, grease, and unhelpfully a crumpled gum wrapper. Likely dropped by one of the apprentices on a lunch break. You sigh. Whisperer number 7 was your high-shelf model, specially designed to circulate air among the rarely touched volumes, almanacs from 1812, brittle songbooks, and a terrifyingly dense legal treatise bound in something that might be eelskin. It needs fixing, fast. Downstairs, the staff room becomes a makeshift workshop. Miss Peel arrives with her emergency repair kit, oil canisters, precision pliers, and a small pouch labeled "Absolutely Necessary Swearing Pebbles." These are for squeezing, not throwing. Mostly. Your apprentices gather around, eyes wide. For them, it's an event. For you, it's a test. Because fixing a whisperer is nothing like building one. Repair involves understanding not just the motion, but the memory baked into the brass. Which gears wear out first? Which wires fray quietly until everything stops humming? You set to work. The fan's internal spool is cracked, probably warped from too many summer days and one ill-fated attempt to run it on tea steam. The newer apprentices take notes while the older ones squint with the satisfied grimace of those who've broken many things before finally learning how not to. The repair takes the better part of the day. You clean, replace the pinion gear, and swap out the cracked housing with a slightly mismatched one that gives it a patchwork look. You call it character. Once it's back in place, the moment of truth arrives. You wind it up, step back, and hold your breath. A faint click. Then a gentle whir. Then that soothing hush of moving air. Whisperer number 7 lives again. Your little audience cheers. Miss Peel offers you a biscuit as if knighthood were out of stock, and you realize something important. The fans aren't just machines anymore. They're residents. And like any good resident, they age, break down, need mending, and deserve a bit of dignity. Historians still argue whether Victorian mechanics saw their inventions as tools or companions. But in your library, the answer is easy. You don't just maintain them, you respect them. Every whisperer has a personality. Number 3 clicks when the weather changes. Number 11 hums a half note too low, like it's trying to start a barbershop quartet. You know their rhythms better than your own sleep. And you're not alone. Other libraries write to you now with their repair woes. The fan in Norwich that blew its winding gear straight into the bishop's ceremonial robes. The one in Devon that kept attracting pigeons. You send back diagrams, tips, sympathy. Miss Peel even adds little drawings of smiling fans holding tools. You develop a new ritual. Each fan gets a birthday, a small card noting the day it was installed, its quirks, and the names of those who built or maintained it. You tack them up on a board labeled the Whispering Family. It becomes a favorite among visitors. Children stand there reading names like Sir Draftalot and Lady Wentworth. You watch them giggle, then run to their parents asking to see the one that smells like cinnamon. That's number 5, scented once by accident and now forever haunted by the spice. But with affection comes complexity. Your fans are now integral to the library's structure. The thought of one breaking down sends tremors through your schedule. You form a maintenance rota, train the apprentices more rigorously, and keep spare parts tucked away in biscuit tins like precious jewels. The hardest part? Explaining to the city council why your budget now includes tuning fork calibrations and brass therapy sessions. They eventually give in. After all, your fans save them money. Fewer book replacements. Lower staff sick days. Happier patrons. And in a delightful twist of fate, a local playwright pens a short stage piece titled The Whisperer's Apprentice, a lightly fictionalized version of your exploits. You attend the opening night. The fans on stage are made of papier-mâché and optimism, but the sentiment is there. The audience laughs, gasps, even claps when Miss Teal threatens to hurl a book at a malfunctioning gear. Back at the library, you make a new rule. No fan goes unchecked for more than 6 days. It's written in chalk above the supply cupboard. Wind waits for no one. One morning, you discover that a particularly rebellious whisperer has stopped again. Number 2, the one in the newspaper annex. You expect the worst, a broken coil, a slipped gear, but instead, you find a tiny slip of paper jammed between the blades. It reads, "I like your fans. They make me feel calm." No name. Just that. You smooth it flat and place it in your repair log. Then you check the bearings, tighten the bolt, and start it humming again. These quiet machines, once seen as novelties, are now the beating heart of the building. And as they age, just like everything else inside these walls, you find yourself growing more careful, more reverent. Not just about air or dust or preservation, but about continuity. About the invisible rhythms of human care. Whisperers need oil. So do people. Every week, without fail, you find yourself up a ladder, crouched behind a bookshelf, or under a reading desk, winding, oiling, tightening, listening. Because even the smallest gust of air, guided by a gentle hand, can change how people breathe, read, feel. It's not glamorous work. But it's good work. And it hums. It's a foggy Tuesday, one of those thick, muffled days when the entire world seems to be wearing socks over its ears, when you find yourself summoned to the Royal Society of Librarians and Allied Functionaries. Yes, that's a real thing. And yes, they wear robes. The letter is written in an aggressively curly hand and sealed with a wax emblem that resembles a flaming inkwell. You half expect it to self-destruct after reading. But instead, it simply invites you, no, commands you, to present your air modulation innovations at their annual conference. And to bring visual aids. You groan. Miss Peel cackles. Time to make the whisperers famous. You arrive at the Society's meeting hall weeks later, armed with a brass model fan, sketches, and a surprisingly lifelike puppet named Breezy the Educational Draft. The audience is packed. Rows upon rows of librarians, historians, archivists, and one man who smells strongly of tinned herring. Your talk begins smoothly. You walk them through your first dusty despair, the tea-soaked fan prototype, the duct-tape days of airflow experiments. The crowd listens politely, until you mention mold-resistant airflow pockets. Then they lean in. When you reveal that your fans are not powered by electricity but by counterweights, wound clockwork, and a few misappropriated cuckoo clock guts, someone gasps. And then comes the real magic. You pull a cord. The model fan turns. Slowly at first, then with that signature whisper. The air stirs. A ribbon flutters. A few people blink, visibly impressed. One woman in the back actually claps. It's a small triumph, but one you savor. Historians still argue whether this conference marked the turning point in Victorian passive air control, whether your demonstration inspired libraries across Britain to reimagine their battle against dust and decay. But there's no denying what happens next. Requests begin pouring in. You receive letters on scented paper, telegrams in all caps, even one telegram entirely in rhyming couplets. They all want to know how they can build their own whisperers. You draft a manual. It takes you 3 weeks and one sprained wrist. The document is a mix of technical diagrams, poetic encouragements, if your blades do squeal, a drop of oil shall heal, and deeply personal notes like, do not name your fans after ex-lovers. You will regret it during repairs. Miss Peel adds a glossary. The apprentices contribute sketches. The first edition goes out to a handful of libraries. But then a bookseller in Leeds prints copies and sells them wrapped in brown paper for 2 shillings each. Within a month, it's a cult hit. By the end of the year, there are rumors of whisperer clubs forming in secret, where librarians gather to discuss talk ratios and fanblade aesthetics over sherry. And the designs evolve. Someone in Birmingham adds a hand crank option. A Cambridge archivist paints flowers on her fan blades and reports that it makes the air smell sweeter, though that's likely the lilacs on her desk. Even the Natural History Museum gets involved, installing whisperers in their stuffed animal exhibit, leading to one rather confusing letter from a child who wrote, "The lion breathed on me and it was lovely. It's a movement now. You didn't mean to start one. You just wanted to read without coughing up a dust ball. But now, you're the de facto leader of a quiet revolution, one gentle gust at a time." With popularity comes politics. A rival librarian in Bath, Mr. Hollister, begins publicly criticizing your designs. Too whimsical, he declares in a rather pompous pamphlet titled On the Perils of Over-Engineered Silence. He calls whisperers frivolous contraptions that romanticize air. You respond with a single sentence published in the Monthly Archivist. Better romanticized air than romanticized mildew. It becomes a catchphrase. People embroider it on tea towels. You receive one, anonymously, with gold thread and a little embroidered whisperer fan in the corner. Still, Mr. Hollister is not your only problem. The Royal Society demands standardization. They want all whisperers to follow a singular model. Uniform blade sizes. Approved materials. Serial numbers. Miss Peel scoffs. They'll be asking us to license the air next. You argue back, publicly, in letters, in speeches, even in a poem you perform in a small bookshop with excellent acoustics. Your central thesis, variation is strength. Libraries are not uniform. Why should the fans be? Historians later refer to this dispute as the Great Blowout. Eventually, the society relents. Sort of. They issue guidelines instead of mandates. And you keep inventing. One design uses bellows. Another repurposes old phonograph parts to produce a fan that purrs like a contented cat. An apprentice creates a version with a built-in scent, well, lavender on Mondays, lemon on Fridays. Someone else invents a whisperer you can wear on your belt. You dub it the fantastic. It doesn't catch on. You keep the prototype anyway. It hums like a sleepy bee. Despite the debates, the critics, the slight injury caused when a crank handle snapped mid-demo and flung a paperweight into a wall, the movement continues. Dust levels drop. Complaints decrease. And, perhaps most importantly, people linger longer in libraries now. Not just to read, but to exist. To sit, breathe, drift. The whisperers become synonymous with that feeling. Gentle air, the rustle of pages, time softened into a breeze. One evening, after closing, you walk through the stacks. The fans murmur gently. The lights are low. Everything smells of parchment, oil, and faint rosemary. You stop by the guest book and see someone has written. Came here to escape the world. Stayed for the air. You smile. And in the hush that follows, you hear it again, the same sound you've nurtured for years now. Whir. Whisper. Home. You're back in the archives, elbow deep in paperwork that smells like 1837 and regrets, when the letter arrives, thick cream envelope, suspiciously crisp. The seal bears the unmistakable insignia of the Office of Civic Sanitation, a bureaucratic branch so humorless they once banned an April Fool's pamphlet titled "Is Your Dust Alive?" You open it slowly, half expecting a cease and desist for excessive airflow. Instead, it's something worse, a request for a formal inspection. Your fans, it seems, have drawn attention. Not just from fellow librarians and wayward poets, but from the health authorities. They want to make sure your whisperers, your quiet, loyal brass beasts aren't spreading particulates or, heaven forbid, disturbing the natural sedimentary order of upper shelving. You read that phrase twice, just to be sure. Miss Peel reads it once, then breaks into wheezing laughter and mutters something about dust diplomacy. Still, inspection day arrives, and with it, a delegation of 5, 2 from Civic Sanitation, 1 from the Department of Unnatural Airflows, and a man named Clive who's only there to measure things with suspiciously loud calipers. They wear matching bowler hats and carry clipboards like their shields. You offer them tea. They decline. Of course. You begin the tour. Number 3, humming along beside the periodicals section, gets a raised eyebrow. Number 11, gently whirring above the oversized atlases, earns a suspicious sniff. When they reach number 7, the beloved attic whisperer recently resurrected, they bring out what appears to be a dust spectrometer. You've never seen one in real life. It looks like a periscope mated with a telescope and then lost the will to live. They collect readings. They scribble notes. And then they ask the question, How do you ensure equitable dust redistribution? You blink. And blink again. Because no one, in the entire history of breathing, has ever worried about the equality of dust. Still, you launch into your explanation, how each whisperer is angled, timed, and balanced to keep air circulating without creating gust zones. You even show them your airflow chart, the one Miss Peel decorated with tiny wind sprites and a doodle of a librarian surfing a book tornado. They don't laugh. But they do nod. The lead inspector, a tall man with the personality of a wooden spoon, finally clears his throat. Have any books exhibited signs of air fatigue? You consider this. Define fatigue. He clarifies. Binding fray, excessive fluttering, page breeze rash. You assure him the only thing your books suffer from is chronic rereading. But you show him the records anyway, humidity logs, dust logs, temperature logs, even that weird phase where you tracked the behavior of paperclips near moving air. Spoiler, they mostly just sat there. Historians still debate whether these early inspections slowed or catalyzed fan adoption in Victorian institutions. Some argue that bureaucracy nearly choked the movement, others say the scrutiny forced refinement. What's certain is this: you pass. With one exception. Number 9, your compact underdesk unit, is deemed too vigorous. Apparently, it sent a lady's bonnet flying last month. You nod solemnly and promise to muzzle it, though what that means in fan terms remains blissfully undefined. After the delegation departs, you collapse into your armchair. Miss Peel presents celebratory scones, and one of the apprentices gifts you a handmade pin shaped like a fan with the words Certified Draft Wrangler stamped on it. You wear it proudly. Word spreads fast. Within days, other institutions are scrambling to prepare for their own inspections. You get requests for training sessions, fan etiquette booklets, even whisperer behavior charts like one might use for schoolchildren. You oblige, partly because it's funny, partly because it's smart. One chart becomes a hit. Is your fan behaving? It includes categories like murmuring contentedly, slightly rattling, offer tea, clicking menacingly, summon Peel, roaring like industrial thunder, evacuate. You laminate it and hang it near the staff room kettle. The civic inspection also has an unexpected benefit. The press catches wind, pun very much intended. One afternoon, a reporter from the Illustrated London Curiosity arrives. She's young, cheerful, and dangerously enthusiastic about niche inventions. She interviews you, sketches the fans, and asks Miss Peel for one quote that captures the soul of the system. Peel doesn't blink. Air belongs to everyone. Dust belongs to no one. It becomes the article's title. And within a week, libraries from Edinburgh to Exeter are putting up whisperers, or at least pretending to until they can afford them. But you notice something else now, something subtler. The way visitors start asking about the fans like they're part of the staff. One child wants to name them. A regular patron offers to knit tiny scarves for them in winter. And that's when you realize you need help. You can't be the sole custodian of these humming, breathing machines. You need allies. So, you start the registry. Each installed whisperer gets logged, numbered, described. Builders sign their name. Users record observations, airflow strength, quirks, and preferred wind directions. It's part logbook, part love letter. And it grows. Fast. You install a small postbox by the entrance. Whisperer notes here, please. People drop in letters. Feedback. Compliments. Once, a haiku about number 4's bravery during a storm. And in the background, always, the fans hum. Not loudly. Not intrusively. Just steadily. Reminding you that the war on dust isn't a war at all. It's a dance. One puff. One breath. One paper-thin swirl at a time. By now, you're practically part fan yourself, equal parts ink, brass, and stubbornness. You can't walk into a room without subconsciously gauging the air's texture. Thick and soupy, needs a double blade setup. Stale and suspicious, cross-vent with a counterclockwise spinner. You've become something of an airflow sommelier. So it's only natural that when the invitation comes to consult at the British Museum, you say yes. Or more precisely, you say, finally. The place is practically the temple of dust. You've heard stories, sealed rooms, rare scrolls that haven't breathed fresh air since Napoleon was in short trousers, and one crate in the Egyptology wing that allegedly made a curator sneeze for 11 straight minutes. In Latin. The museum's director of preservation, Dr. Alabaster Thrip, yes, really, greets you with an expression that suggests you've been summoned to exorcise spirits. He's tall, tweedy, and tense. You can smell his anxiety beneath the formaldehyde. We have papyri, he says, that flake if you look at them too hard. You nod solemnly, resisting the urge to whisper, challenge accepted. You're escorted through corridors lit by flickering gaslight, past glass cases of mummified animals, Greco-Roman marbles, and one mysterious jug labeled probably not cursed. And then, finally, you're there, the inner archive, sealed, sacred, and full of air that might technically be antique. You open the door. It hits you instantly, a weighty, ancient stillness. Like walking into a paragraph written 2,000 years ago. The silence is so thick you feel rude just existing in it. The fans won't be welcome here unless they earn it. So you observe. You sit quietly, watching the floating motes in a sunbeam like a cat studying prey. You take notes. You sketch airflow patterns based on candle flickers and feather movements. You even bring in number 13, your smallest, gentlest prototype, disguised as a decorative urn, just to see how it behaves. And you wait. Days pass. Miss Peel sends a postcard, do not get possessed by scrolls. Also, bring biscuits. Finally, you submit your proposal, a whisperer array hidden in the cornices, using slow pulleys and brass deflectors that create a circular, low-volume breeze, barely perceptible, but enough to keep the air from stagnating. Dr. Thrip raises an eyebrow. Will it rustle? Only your conscience, you reply. Historians still debate whether this installation marked the true birth of microclimate engineering in archives. Some credit your work, others suggest it was merely a stepping stone in a longer chain. Either way, the museum agrees. Installation begins. You work late, after hours, among sarcophagi and unblinking stone heads. You name each unit after a god Anubis, Thoth, Bastet, because naming them comforts you. Also, it makes repair logs more entertaining. Thoth is wheezing again. May require lubrication and or a small offering. The fans work. No more dry rot. No more papyrus curling like toast in a broiler. The artifacts sigh in relief. Probably not literally, but you swear the air feels grateful. Word gets out. Soon, other museums want in. The Victoria and Albert. The Ashmolean. Even that small one in Devon that insists it owns Napoleon's third favorite spoon. You begin offering consultations. Quiet ones. You're not in it for the fame. You just want to see old paper breathe easy. The public, though, they are interested. A traveling exhibition opens, the Whispering Gallery, Air and Silence in the Modern Archive. You attend anonymously, standing in the corner as visitors lean in to hear the whisperers at work. One little boy asks his mother, "Are they alive?" She replies, "Not quite. But they dream." And you feel something catch in your throat. Meanwhile, back at your library, the fans are evolving. Your apprentices, clever things, have started crafting hybrid units. One team pairs a whisperer with a miniature bell that chimes when airflow drops. Another installs a humidity sensor that triggers a gentle oscillation. One mad genius integrates a music box so the fan whirs to the tune of Greensleeves. It's oddly hypnotic. But with innovation comes occasional misfire. There's the incident with the scent cartridge overload that made the East Wing smell like violet custard for a week. And the rogue fan that developed an unexpected affinity for spinning backward. You dub it the Rebel. Still, the public loves it. Schools begin requesting whisperers. To help students focus, they claim. Though some just want to watch the ribbons dance. Theaters request backstage installations. One opera singer insists she sings better when the air kisses her curls. You nod like that makes scientific sense. But perhaps the strangest request comes from a baker who wants whisperers in his proving room. You're skeptical. But he insists they create the perfect proofing vibe. The bread? Excellent. You commission a fan just for him. It's shaped like a wheat stalk. He names it Brise Le Pain. Some nights, when all is quiet, you walk the corridors alone. Each fan hums like a contented cat. The papers lie flat, unbothered by the age they carry. You run your fingers along the bindings. Nothing cracks. You've built a strange, invisible symphony. And the city has begun to notice. A journalist from the Penny Scientific calls your work the most elegant response to entropy ever devised. You clip the article and pin it next to your desk. And that's when the envelope arrives. Larger than most. Embossed. Heavy. You open it slowly. And inside, an invitation from the Queen's Librarian. Buckingham Palace has a dust problem. And they'd like to talk. Buckingham Palace is grand, opulent, and utterly unprepared for your toolkit. You arrive with a small trunk, 2 whisperers disguised as hatboxes, and a polite but firm letter from your own head librarian confirming your temporary loan to the Crown. Miss Peel adds a postscript, "Don't let the corgis lick the wiring." The Queen's Librarian, Sir Archibald Sprigg, greets you with all the warmth of an understeeped teabag. He's impeccably dressed, monocled, and appears to view innovation the way others view mold. The problem, he intones, is ancestral dust. One does not simply waft away the breath of queens. You assure him that your fans waft with extreme dignity. He doesn't laugh. Instead, he leads you to the Royal Archive, a series of rooms tucked behind grander chambers, lined with towering bookcases and more velvet curtains than you thought existed outside of opera houses. It smells like beeswax, leather, and centuries-old footmen. And it's full of dust. Not rebellious, swirling, chaotic dust. No, this dust has settled in. It lounges. It reclines. It's the kind of dust that knows its lineage. You test the air with a feather. It doesn't stir. Sir Archibald watches you closely. "We are not," he says, "looking for a breeze. We are looking for reverent nudging." You nod. Reverent nudging it is. Installation begins under scrutiny so intense it feels like surgery. Every bolt must be brass. Every whisperer must be invisible from the Queen's preferred reading chair. And nothing may hum above mezzo piano. You end up placing 3 miniature fans, number 17, number 18, and a new prototype called number 19, the Swan. It's shaped like a folded letter and emits a breath so soft, it could part the fringe on a doily without rustling the page beneath. And it works. Slowly, delicately, the air stirs. Not enough to ruffle skirts. Just enough to keep the dust from nesting. You document everything in the royal ledger. Handwritten. Flourished. Historians still argue whether this moment, the formal introduction of whisperers to a royal collection, legitimized their use in upper society or merely raised their profile. One school calls it the fanfication of authority. Another, more scholarly group, calls it a logical evolution of preventive conservation. You call it Thursday. When the Queen herself makes an unannounced visit, your stomach flips like a freshly turned folio. She does not introduce herself. She simply enters, glides past Sir Archibald, and stops in front of number 19. She lifts a gloved hand, holds it near the airflow, smiles, then says, whispers like a Windsor, and leaves. You're knighted on the spot. Figuratively, of course. But Sir Archibald does clap you on the shoulder, which is as close to a bear hug as he likely gets. News spreads. Suddenly, whisperers aren't just the quiet workhorses of dusty archives. They're fashion. Prestige. A subtle status symbol among those with more shelves than sense. You receive letters from nobles requesting bespoke circulation sculpture. One lady demands a fan shaped like a pheasant. Another wants her scented with rosewater and tuned to match her pianoforte's middle C. Your apprentices invent a new division, aesthetic airworks. You quietly create a second one, sensible units for real libraries. The palace asks for a maintenance schedule. You provide it along with a small box of spare parts, a velvet bag of tiny oiling brushes, and a sternly worded label, "Do not feed the whisperers." You return home exhausted and exalted. Miss Peel greets you with a tray of scones and a new badge, Royal Draft Handler. She pins it next to your original. But the world won't let you rest. The fame has tipped. Reporters knock. Tourists peer in. Someone offers to purchase number 3 for an absurd sum and display it in a curiosity museum next to a mummified hedgehog. You refuse. Politely. Still, the requests keep coming. An inventor in Manchester proposes a steam-powered fan. You try it once. It singes half the catalogue. A French collector sends you a pamphlet on Airs Parfums, perfumed airflow designed to evoke literary genres. Lavender for romance. Tobacco for mystery. Absinthe for poetry. You file it under things we're absolutely not trying while the Queen might be watching. Then come the philosophers. One writes an essay arguing that your fans represent the democratization of breath. Another claims the whisperer is a metaphor for the tension between order and entropy. You wonder what they'd say about number 6, which still hiccups whenever someone sings near it. Still, you give a talk at the Royal Society. Nervously. You wear your badge and your cleanest waistcoat. You speak about airflow, dust reduction, and the ethics of preservation. You finish with the line, "Even the air deserves a librarian." They applaud. A few even nod in the reverent, slow way that means you've said something worth remembering. But after all this royalty, renown, society papers, what you remember most is this. The moment you walk back into your own library, late that night, and all the fans greet you in gentle chorus. They've been maintained, oiled, trusted. Peel has trained the apprentices well. The logs are up to date. The dust levels minimal. Even number 9, the too vigorous desk unit, has a tiny bonnet now, crocheted by a patron and labeled "Behave." You settle in. You exhale. You listen. And in that soft, steady murmur of fans, you hear something else. Not your voice. Not your story. But their story. The books. Breathing. Whispering. Waiting. And somewhere, in the farthest wing, number 13 chirps its little music box tune. Greensleeves. Perfectly in tune. A year passes. You hardly notice it, to be honest. Time, like dust, settles slowly when you're surrounded by books. Days blur into projects, tea into stronger tea, and fans into more fans. You now have 27 named whisperers, 14 apprentices, and exactly 1 complaints ledger, mostly filled with entries like Unit 22 is too contemplative. Request brisker vibes. Then, one morning, the letter arrives. It's handwritten. Elegant. Slightly smudged as if composed in a hurry. The seal is unfamiliar. It begins, "Esteemed Curator of Air. We are writing from Calcutta." You blink. Read again. And again. They've heard of your work. The Royal Library of India, still recovering from decades of humidity and warping wood, wants your advice. Not just for one building, for an entire region of climate-struggling collections. Scrolls, palm leaf manuscripts, early printed Bengali texts, all quietly crumbling in the heat. And dust, it seems, is only part of the problem. You pack your bag. It's the longest journey of your life. You sail for weeks, sharing a cabin with a taxidermist who insists on preserving his parrots with clove oil. You arrive disheveled, sunburned, and so thoroughly marinated in ocean salt that your boots creak differently. But oh, what a world you find. The Calcutta Library is beautiful. It's a building of marble, stained glass, and carved teak beams, heavy with moisture and memory. The air is thick with rain and ancient ink. The staff greet you with cautious smiles and wary eyes. They've had foreigners with big ideas before. You don't bring ideas. You bring feathers. And patience. And tiny fans that look like they were invented by a clockmaker with a caffeine addiction. You listen. You learn. Humidity, not dryness, is the villain here. Dust is almost secondary. The real danger is mildew, books so swollen with moisture they weep when you lift them. Silk bindings curling. Palm leaves sticking together like forgotten pancakes. Historians still argue whether this era marked the birth of truly international conservation science. Some call it a partnership, others say it was the quiet rescue of empire-fractured knowledge. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere sweaty in between. You begin adapting. Whisperers won't work, not in their current form. The air here needs to be moved and cooled and dried. You try dehumidifying salts. Fail. You experiment with sandalwood-scented desiccant sachets. Fail again, now the books smell too pleasant and someone keeps pocketing them. Eventually, you design something new, the cool flute. It's slender. Bamboo-cased. Wind-powered via a rooftop vent array. It doesn't blow, it draws. Gently pulls moist air away from the stacks, like a musical instrument that plays only silence. You name it number 28. The first one is installed in a manuscript room holding Buddhist chants carved on blackened palm leaf. You watch, breath held, as the edges relax. The room no longer smells like a forgotten greenhouse. The words begin to shine. Word spreads. You are invited to other cities, Bombay, Madras, Lahore. You meet caretakers who have preserved knowledge for centuries without formal recognition, scribes, paper menders, smokeroom binders using neem oil and lime. You sit at their feet. You do not talk much. You take notes. One of them gives you a folded lotus leaf filled with copper filings and says, "Put this inside your next fan. It will make it kind." You do. And it hums differently. You return home changed. Not just tan and 37% spice. But humbled. Your library feels smaller now, but sweeter, too. Peel greets you with lemon cake and a new filing system. She has invented a shorthand for describing fan behavior. C1 means contented hum, V2 means vexed rattling. There's even an emoji system. You start teaching again. But it's different now. Your apprentices no longer simply build fans, they write wind maps. They study fungus. They debate whether scrolls dream more when stored upright or flat. Answer: historians still argue. You give your tools names in Sanskrit, Arabic, and Hindi. And you realize you've made a new kind of map. Not of roads or rivers, but of breath, flow, preservation. One night, you walk through the library with the lights off. It's not dark. Every fan has a glowstone now, dim and warm, like fireflies trained to be librarians. You sit in the center. You listen to the breathing. And you remember something Miss Peel once said, years ago, when you first started this. It's not about cleaning air. It's about protecting stillness. You get it now. In every whisper, every breeze, you've been defending silence. Not emptiness, but the kind of silence books deserve. The kind that lets old voices speak again. Even the ones almost forgotten. Especially those. The next morning, there's another letter. It's from Egypt. Something about scrolls. And scorpions. And a fan that sings lullabies. You smile. And start packing again. It's hard to top Calcutta. But Egypt tries. You arrive in Cairo with your tool case, 3 heat-resistant waistcoats, and exactly no understanding of what you're getting into. The invitation was vague, something about manuscripts in distress and irregular air harmonics. Which is either a librarian's cry for help or a very avant-garde band name. The library, tucked behind a mosque courtyard, is quiet as moonlight and smells of sun-warmed limestone, ink, and tea boiled for hours. Its curator is a woman named Samira who greets you with a handshake so firm you're sure she could shelve encyclopedias with her bare hands. We keep scrolls, she says, walking briskly past rows of battered display cases, but they don't keep well. They crack. They flake. Some have seen more pharaohs than repairs. The manuscripts are astonishing: papyrus, parchment, stitched codices, and fragments older than most known languages. Some are sealed in glass. Others lie on linen cloths like injured birds. And yes, the air hums oddly. There's a natural draft, soft but inconsistent, flowing from the building's open arches. When the desert wind shifts, it brings whispers through the halls, cool 1 minute, hot the next. The scrolls hate it. They curl like leaves in fire. You try setting up a whisperer. Number 5 immediately panics. The airflow here doesn't behave. It resists control. 1 moment gentle, the next whirlwind. You find sand in your pocket watch. Samir smiles knowingly. You have to think ancient, she says. They didn't block wind. They channeled it. And she shows you something remarkable. A wall of wind scoops. Ancient Egyptian architecture, you learn, included ingenious passive ventilation systems, stone vents, wind catchers, cooling towers. You'd read about them, but seeing them, it's like discovering the original draft of your entire profession. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians truly invented climate control, or simply learned how to live with the breath of the desert. What's undeniable is this: they knew how to move air like a librarian moves silence. You begin rebuilding. No whisperers this time. You collaborate with local stonemasons and old-school mechanics. Together, you design a hybrid system, stone-guided airflow connected to slow-turning copper blades mounted near ceiling vents. You call them breath wheels. They're silent, gentle, incredibly beautiful when the sun hits them. Number 30 is your favorite. It's shaped like a lotus, with fan blades etched to mimic papyrus leaves. When it spins, it sounds like sand being drawn across silk. And the scrolls? They relax. No curling. No flaking. Even the fragment labeled Ptolemy something something astrology seems to stretch flatter, like an old cat finding a sunny spot. You sleep in the library for a week. Each night, you lie under the stars, wrapped in linen, listening to the rhythm of wind moving over stone. It's different than home. More ancient. More forgiving. You write Miss Peel a letter. The fans here are the ancestors of ours. They don't hum. They remember. She sends back a parcel with mint tea, oat biscuits, and a tiny copper owl, your library's unofficial mascot. You name it Professor Draftington and perch it on the breath wheel panel. Samira laughs and makes it official by writing its name in Arabic script beneath. You pretend not to get emotional. Then, just as you're preparing to leave, someone arrives at the library gates. A boy, dusty from travel, holding a scroll wrapped in cloth. It's barely legible. Charred. The ink bubbled. But under magnification, you can make out enough. It's a fragment of ancient Egyptian cataloging rules. Not spells. Not politics. Just shelving procedures. You laugh out loud. Samira whispers, librarians always leave breadcrumbs. You frame it in the reading room. Under glass, the air cool and calm, you place a small note. Proof that even the oldest minds worried about where the poetry went. Back in England, you're met with damp skies and jubilant chaos. While you were away, Peel and the apprentices launched a fan exhibition. Visitors come from cities and museums. The local baker now sells whispered scones, soft with a swirl of cardamom, light as paper and twice as flaky. There's a small scandal when someone insists on a scented airflow corridor. You allow it, lavender and pine, but add a sign, sniff responsibly. You realize your library has become famous. Not tourist famous. Not even academic famous. But quietly legendary. There are whispers of a fan philosophy symposium. You suspect it's just 3 scholars and a cheese tray, but you're flattered nonetheless. And then one evening, you find a letter slipped into the suggestion box. It's childlike handwriting. No name. Just, I like it here. It feels like the books are breathing and the air is listening. You read it twice. Then you add it to the wall behind your desk, next to the Queen's cryptic compliment, and the ancient shelving instructions, and a sketch of Professor Draftington wearing goggles. You realize your job has become something else. Not just a librarian, not just a fan keeper, but a cartographer of quiet. Someone charting the maps that wind makes between pages. You lie down that night under your usual blanket, listening to the fans. And you think, softly, dreamily, about how far air can travel. The library doesn't need you every day now. It runs like a dream, like a precisely wound clock made of whispers and oiled gears and readers who instinctively lower their voices. You still walk the aisles, of course. Still adjust a fan's tilt. Still whisper encouragement to a particularly stubborn binding. But mostly, you observe. You have become, somehow, a librarian emeritus of air. Which is why, when a telegram arrives from America with only 6 words, New York Public Library. Fan trouble. Urgent. You hesitate. But only for a second. Because if there's one thing you've learned, it's that when someone says their fans are acting up, what they really mean is, we forgot how to listen to the air. You cross the Atlantic with nothing but a suitcase, a slide rule, and your standard travel fan number 12, nicknamed the Duchess, famous for its haughty rattle and refusal to turn left. And New York, oh, it is loud. It hits you immediately. The honks, the yelling, the skyscrapers that seem to shout look at me, even when silent. The library itself is massive. Magnificent. A marble temple to knowledge, guarded by lions and filled with more books than you could alphabetize in 10 lifetimes. But inside, it's stifling. The air is heavy. Not dusty, exactly. But restless. Overworked fans buzz like insects. Pages stick together. And someone has inexplicably installed a ventilation system that wheezes like a smoker climbing stairs. You are greeted by a man with an excellent moustache and a name tag that simply reads Tad. Fan coordinator, he says, offering a clammy handshake. They told me you were the wind wizard or whatever. You smile politely. I prefer librarian. He leads you downstairs. Through hallways. Past reading rooms with windows jammed shut for security. Into what he calls the pit, a grim basement where a half-dozen fans lie disassembled on work tables, looking like deceased mechanical birds. It's a mess. Industrial. Loud. Over-engineered. This one vibrated itself off the shelf, Tad says, tapping a dented casing. You kneel, gently running a hand over the housing. It's sad. The fan isn't broken, it's misunderstood. Too powerful. Too fast. No wonder the pages were twitching. So you slow it. You take off the motor. Replace it with a hand crank and a gear system. Add a soft leather belt lined with graphite powder. Rebalance the blades with tiny wax weights. When you finish, you flick it on. It sighs. Not whirs, not clanks, sighs. Like it's grateful. You look up and Tad is staring. Did you just tame it? You nod. That's number 31, you say. She's a New Yorker. She'll need space. You install her on the 3rd floor, near the rare manuscripts. Within days, the room feels cooler. Less agitated. One librarian swears the binding on a 1794 pamphlet retightened itself. Someone else claims the fan smells like plot twists. You neither confirm nor deny. Word spreads. You're invited to lecture at Columbia. You decline, instead teaching a small evening class in the library basement called Breezes and Binding, an intimate seminar on passive climate care. 10 people sign up. One of them is a poet. Another brings you a tiny hand-knitted muffler for fan warmth. Tad builds a fan of his own. It's square. A little awkward. But it hums in F-sharp and plays jazz on Thursdays. You approve. Historians still argue whether this brief New York residency was the true start of the global fan renaissance. Some say yes, pointing to the sudden surge in handcrafted airflow devices across public libraries from Montreal to Buenos Aires. Others say no, it was just a moment, a draft that passed through time. You don't weigh in. You're too busy following the breeze. Before you leave, you visit the lions out front. Pat one on the paw. Whisper, keep watching. The lion doesn't blink. But the wind shifts. Back in England, everything is still. You've missed it. Missed the clink of fan chains. The scent of book glue. The sigh your library gives when you open the main door, like a pet resettling itself. Peel meets you at the gate with a box of fig biscuits and the news that Whisperer number 3 has started spinning again on its own. Coincidence? She asks. Resurgence, you answer. That night, you host a gathering. Just a quiet tea under the high-domed ceiling. Librarians. Engineers. Apprentices. 1 monk. 2 ex-horologists. A boy who once built a fan out of origami and marshmallows. You sit in a circle and simply listen. To the tick of the clock. To the whir of 31 fans. To the breath between sentences. And you realize this isn't just about books. Never was. It's about preservation, yes. About care. But also about attention. A kind of reverence for stillness that's almost extinct in the noisy age. So you raise your teacup. To dust, you say, smiling. And to those who fight it. The fans spin on. Quietly. Proudly. Like dancers who've just learned the music never really stopped. Your library is quieter than ever. But it's not the silence of abandonment. It's the silence of something complete. The pages rest flatter. The fans rotate at exactly the right speed, just fast enough to kiss the top edges of the shelves, just slow enough to make you wonder if they're even moving. A kind of perfect hum, like someone has tuned the entire building. You've even named the airflow patterns. The morning breeze that curls past the card catalogue is Edith. The mid-afternoon lift near the window seat is Sir Flutterton. The ticklish draft in the archives that only shows up during thunderstorms is Beryl. You keep their names in a ledger. It's half joke, half sacred ritual. The apprentices know them by heart. Yes, there are still apprentices. You weren't sure there would be, after everything. But they keep arriving, nervous, wide-eyed, suspicious of fans but secretly curious. One girl rebuilt a retired whisperer into a lamp that glows only when the room is too dry. Another boy designed a fan entirely out of paper and spit, it didn't last. but it did flutter with surprising defiance before collapsing. You reward creativity, even when it breaks things. There's talk of expanding, of opening a second library, or at least a workshop. You get letters from across the world now, libraries with requests for schematics, advice, blessings. You send back tea and sketches. Sometimes a feather. Sometimes nothing, just the note, let the air teach you. It's enough. But tonight, you're alone in the reading room. The others have gone home. The clock strikes 11. A storm murmurs somewhere in the distance, too shy to commit. You sip something warm, probably cinnamon and mystery, and lean back into your chair, which creaks like a friendly ghost. And you listen. To everything. The fans. The building's bones. The weight of air and time and words. You remember the beginning. The dust. The sweat. The stubborn fans. The letter from Her Majesty. The glint of polished brass in moonlight. You remember number 5 nearly self-destructing in India. You remember Miss Peel in her pocketed apron, lecturing an urchin on book respect. You remember Egypt's breath wheels. New York's chaos. The fan made of spoons. You remember dust, again and again, trying to win. And not quite succeeding. Because of you. Because of them. Because of those tiny, faithful blades spinning gently against the tide of decay. You write a last entry in your logbook. Whisperer number 1 officially retired. Still hums faintly on windy days. Replaced with the swanner. Doesn't just move air, it composes it. You draw a little doodle in the margin. A swan in goggles. And you close the book. Not forever. Just for tonight. Outside, the wind picks up. One of the windows rattles, slightly. You smile and adjust a latch, just enough to let Edith through. She swirls in, brushes your cheek like a memory, and disappears toward the north wing. You follow her path with your eyes. The books don't stir. They don't need to. They're already breathing. Because you made a world where they could. A world where air itself is loyal. And now, you exhale. A little slower than usual. You let the breath ease out of you, like dust slipping from an old sleeve, like a fan winding down after a long, quiet day. You feel the room around you, not just the bed, the walls, or even the blanket tucked over your legs, but the space between. That gentle hum of stillness that wraps around your shoulders like the air in an ancient archive. Soft. Settled. Safe. Maybe you picture yourself back in that library. The lights low. The fans spinning. Their rhythms soothing, steady, each one a promise that nothing is being forgotten tonight. That the pages are safe. That the dust is kept at bay, just enough for dreams to wander in. Maybe you hear the whisper of a fan nearby, real or imagined, nudging the edge of your sleep just right. It doesn't ask anything of you. Doesn't expect. It simply turns. Like the world does. Like you will, when morning comes. And if a thought drifts in, some task unfinished, some noise from the waking world, you smile at it, the way you'd smile at a stubborn draft sneaking through an old window. Let it pass. Let it become part of the story. Because you, tonight, are the librarian. You've shelved every worry. You've labeled every thought. And you've turned the last page. Now let the fans do their work. Let the dust settle. Let the books breathe. Let yourself rest. Good night.